Hello everybody, welcome to Inside China Business. Let's get started. So today we're going to look at a report from Mckinsey. It's called A Global View of How Consumer Behavior is Changing Amid Covid-19. Now, this is an interesting report because companies, hedge funds, economists, businessmen are all looking towards the future now about what's going to happen all around the world with regards to Covid-19. And the problem is, economics is generally it's based on situations that are happening and have happened, and they use this data to anticipate and predict what's going to occur in the future. The problem is, economics is theory based, okay? So theories do not always match, and different circumstances cause different things to happen. There's so many variables going on in the global economy, it's hard to establish any true path of what's going to happen, but we can surmise, we can use the data and try to think of things that are going to happen based on good data. Now, I'm going to look through some graphs in regard to China specifically and explain what this means for China and whether I believe the data is valid or not. So this graph represents the consumer sentiment from March to April, and it's quite interesting because it shows people's outlook on the economy and the economic situation in general. What we can see that's really interesting though is while the United States has a huge decline in this consumer sentiment, China has had a consistent increase, well, almost consistent increase in consumer sentiment, reducing a little bit in April. So throughout the harsher times, essentially, China has maintained their consumer positivity. Now this could be considered quite unusual, seeing as everywhere has been closed down for a long period of time. This might reflect faith and confidence and comfort in the government, but it also might be that these statistics are not actually that accurate. If you look at all other countries, particularly in Europe, that are facing this crisis in a much deeper way with a lot more deaths, we can see that the consumer confidence has declined substantially. So this is very reflective of having decent data for Europe and potentially not so decent data for China. This is it's hard to determine. Now this is the next graph we have, and this is also quite interesting because it shows consumers globally expect their income to decrease in the future. Great. Well, this is midway through the crisis, of course. The US have a strong tendency towards this. Brazil, South Africa, many countries in the world have a strong tendency to believe this, with an overpowering positivity in China. Again, the statistics for China are very different compared to other countries, and you always have to question where this data comes from. It's very important. And China, I must admit, is starting to be, where I'm living actually, is towards the end of the crisis. There is a systematic opening up over here, and it's been slow, gradual. Everyone's wearing face masks. It seems to be that this is actually the case. But why would incomes expect to increase with everything still slowed down? That is the question. People still are working from home. I'm curious as to where people believe they're going to get these incomes from, unless the major manufacturing bases of face masks and hand sanitizer are in this region of the world. But I'm sure there are many production centers for these things all over the world. So I'm very curious as to what industries they are referring to where there is this many people that are that confident. And it also makes me, of course, question these statistics once again. We can also see that quite broadly on this graph that measures optimism. So more optimistic countries are at the top and planning to increase spending here. So closer to this side, people within countries that are planning to spend more. China is right near the top in terms of optimism, beaten by Saudi Arabia, India as well. India is very optimistic, and Indonesia. And also it's very high up on the confidence to increase spending in the future. Consumer confidence is a very important thing in economics. If you have consumer confidence, it means you're willing to spend more, and that will boost the economy, it will boost aggregate demand, and it will keep businesses alive, it will increase employment. Keynes refers to them as invisible, as animal spirits. So yes, this is the purported idea that China has this level of consumer confidence. It could be true. Maybe people don't think too deeply about what's going on in the economy, or maybe not. If a government gives the idea that consumer confidence is occurring within a country, it might be, again, a self-fulfilling prophecy where consumer confidence does exist. That's a positive thing. If you make people believe in the positivity, it will become self-fulfilling. Like I said, people will purchase more, people will go out more, businesses will be supported. So whether the statistical data is correct or not, it is still of an advantage to purport that data. So this graph here represents global trends in the economy, and what we can see is basically every country that has been measured is very different to China. Again, this is another statistic that really makes me question what is happening and how this data is sourced, because I know personally and anecdotally that when I'm on the subway in the morning over here, or when I'm out, I see people watching TV all the time. All the time. They have a YouTube version called Youku in China, another TV program called iQIYI. It's all on your phones. There's apps you can download, and it's used consistently by so many people across the nation. So I'm not sure that I believe this is the case. I believe these statistics are not that accurate, because arguably most people staying at home everywhere in the world will be increasing their online presence, increasing their watching of TV and stuff. And this exercising thing, all in blue as well, it's more difficult to exercise at home. And a lot of people are over here, I've discovered that yes, even though gym memberships are increasing, there is a genuine proclivity to avoid exercise. This really surprises me that this is in blue where it's in red. This is in blue over here. But you know, it is possible. And you see this working here as well. Really, is everybody maintaining their employment? That's a real question that needs to be answered. People are working from home, okay? And according to one government mandate, a lot of people have been cut down to minimum wage. Now, they could argue statistically they are still working, but many are not. Many schools are closed, many businesses are closed, and minimum wage is only around $200 a month. $200 a month is not a lot of money to live on. I know some foreigners that have been reduced to this salary. So what we're seeing is the salary has been reduced, and then they can statistically claim that these people are working, but actually they might not be working, but they might be on a temporary low wage. Okay, let's look at the final graph. So here we're seeing the expected spending per category over the next 2 weeks. So anticipated spending in different countries on different items over the next few weeks. We can see that most countries are, their colour schemes are very different to China. And this might be indicative of the fact that China is now coming towards the end of the crisis, and other countries are still facing it. But then you could argue that Korea and Japan are also close to the end as well, where US and the UK and France and Germany are still having a few more issues. But the interesting thing is they anticipate spending on gasoline in China to increase over the next 2 weeks. And this is why I was saying there might be an anticipated increase in people going back to work, physically going back to work. However, this might not also be the case. It might simply be that, all across the world, now we have a systematic problem with oil. There's so much supply, there's not enough demand for the oil. Prices have gone down massively to the extent they've actually gone into minus figures because it's costing more to simply hold on to the oil. And China is the only country that anticipates extra spending in these countries, which is unusual to say the least. But my aforementioned argument could be indicative of that. Finally, fitness and wellness is going to increase as well. I assume that means gyms and businesses will open. I know a lot that still aren't, but recently China has put out a QR code for everybody to follow. Even foreigners can now follow it. So it tracks your movements over the next 2 weeks. And if you have not come into contact with other people that have contracted COVID-19, then you are safe to go where you want. You get a green light and you're able to go into restaurants, bars, clubs and all of these things. It is a systematic process of opening up. And as I said, increased consumption on gasoline might be indicative of that, while other countries are still very much in the dark and don't know when they're going to go back to work. So to conclude about this situation, China, the evidence is indicative, if it is to be believed, that China is at the later stage of progression with this virus. It's been closed down for a longer period of time. The governments have installed apps on people's phones where it measures your movement and tracks it consistently. So you get a green light, a yellow light, or a red light determining based on where you've been, and therefore that lets you go to businesses, eat their food, or go to gyms. Now, because of this systematic opening structure, if there is any outbreaks, schools, businesses in that area close immediately. So it's a very on the ground, person by person, systematic way to open up the country, and that's what's been happening, and that's why optimism is improving in China, if the statistics are to be believed. Alright everybody, have a good day, and I hope you enjoyed this quick analysis.